Alright, here we go. Calculating all Pokemon types from most atrocious to greatest. Now, if you have the smallest smidgen of Pokemon knowledge, you would already know that types are assigned to each Pokemon, and it will help determine which Pokemon have an advantage over others in battle. Obviously, different types are going to have different advantages, so the question remains, which typing is the best? To determine this, I'll be using a simple mathematical equation to score each individual type. To simplify, a Pokemon type will gain 3 points for each immunity they have, 2 points for each type it's super effective against, and 1 point for each type it can resist. Subsequently, they will lose 3 points for each type that are immune to it, which makes them a liability, lose 2 points for each type that is super effective against it, so they're weaknesses, and lose 1 point for each type that is capable of resisting them. And if it wasn't obvious, this ranking is based solely on monotype, and tiebreakers will be settled with whatever I put on the screen. So yeah, let's begin. In 18th, and the most atrocious typing in Pokemon, is the grass type. This typing, despite being my favorite color green, despite containing my favorite Pokemon Sceptile, is absolute butt juice. It's super effective against 3 types and is able to resist 4. However, it has both a record-setting 5 weaknesses and 7 types that are able to resist grass attacks. Due to all these negatives, the grass type will be given a final score of -7. Shambolic. In 17th, and the second worst type, is the psychic type. It is only super effective against 2 types and only has 2 resistances, one of those 2 resistance being itself. This also means that Psychic is also resistant against itself alongside Steel. It has 3 weaknesses and is a liability against the Dark type. Final score, -5. In 16th is the normal type. It is the only type with 0 resistances and super effective against nothing. And despite of that, it is one of 2 types to have only 1 weakness, and only 2 types are able to resist normal. It has an immunity to ghost types, however it also can't hit ghost type, so it just cancels out. Final score, -4. In 15th is the elusive dragon type. This supposedly strongest type isn't even that strong. The only reason people think this type is good is because they arguably have the best designs. On top of that, there are 19 legendaries and 8 pseudo legendaries that possess this typing. Yet it's only super effective against 1 type, which is itself, making it one of 2 Pokemon types, other one being normal, to not be super effective against multiple types. To compromise for its lack of super effective variety, it's also one of 2 types to only be resisted by 1 type, that type being Steel. It has 4 resistances and 3 weaknesses, but it's a liability against the Fairy type. Final score, -4. In 14th is Bug. Its typing has the lowest average stats. It is super effective against 3 types and has 3 weaknesses. It can also resist 3 types, however there are 6 types capable of resisting Bug. Final score, -4. In 13 is Ice. It is super effective against 4 types, but also has 4 weaknesses. There are 4 types that are capable of resisting Ice, and its only resistance is itself, making it one of 2 types to not have multiple resistances, the other one being normal. Final score, -3. In 12th is Poison. It is only super effective against 2 types and has 2 weaknesses. 4 types are capable of resisting Poison, but it has 5 resistance, placing it behind only Steel for most resistances. So why is it ranked so low? It's because it's a liability against the Steel type. Final score, -2. In 11th is Rock. It is super effective against 4 types and has 4 resistances, with 3 types that are able to resist Rock. However, it ties Grass for having the most weaknesses in 5. Final score, -1. In 10th is the Electric type. It's capable of resisting 3 types, but there are 3 types capable of resisting Electric. It's only super effective against 2 types and only has 1 weakness, which ties Normal type for having the least amount of weaknesses. However, its weakness of Ground type is also its liability. Final score, -1. In 9th is Fighting type. It is super effective against 5 type, which is tied for the most and is the only type that is super effective against normal. It has 3 weaknesses, 3 resistances, with 5 types that are able to resist fighting. Unfortunately, despite being super effective against 5 types, it's a liability against Ghost, bringing down its score. Final score, -1. In 8th, and the first type with a non-negative score, is Dark. It's super effective against 2 types and has 2 resistances. It's also the only type that is able to resist Ghost type attacks. It has 3 weaknesses, and there are 3 types that are able to resist Dark, but it has an immunity against Psychic type. Final score, 0. This is where types start to get good. In 7th is Fire. It is super effective against 4 types, resistant to 4 types, but at the same time 4 types are able to resist fire, and it has 3 weaknesses. Final score, 2. In 6th is Flying. It has the least amount of monotype Pokemon, with only 4 being pure Flying. It's also the only typing whose resistances are identical with the type it's super effective against, and it has an immunity against ground attacks. It does however have 3 weaknesses and 3 types that can resist Flying. Final score 3. In 5th is Water. It has the most monotype Pokemon at 81, and this is probably due to the fact that it has the most Pokemon in general. It is super effective against 3 types and resist 4, while at the same time only having 2 weaknesses, with only 3 types being able to resist water. Final score 3. In 4th is Ghost. Like Dragon, it's the only type that has one type capable of resisting it, that being Dark. And it's the only type to have multiple immunities, those immunities being Fighting type and Normal. One of those immunities is cancel out due to its inability to hit Normal. It's super effective against 2 types and has 2 weaknesses, being one of 2 types that are super effective against themselves. It also has 2 resistances. Final score 4. In 3rd place is Ground. It has 2 resistances and 2 types that can resist ground, and it ties Fighting for having the most super effective type advantages at 5. Ground is also the only type that is super effective against Electric, and also has an immunity against electric attacks. However, it's a liability against flying, and has 3 weaknesses. Final score 4. In 2nd is the Fairy type. For whatever reason, it has the immunity to Dragon Attack. It is super effective against 3 types, with 3 resistances, with its only downside being that it has 2 weaknesses, and 3 types that are capable of resisting Fairy attacks. Final score 5. In 1st place, and it's not even close, is Steel. It has 3 weaknesses with 4 types that are capable of resisting Steel, yet it still ranks 1 due to what it can do on the other side. It is super effective against 3 types and has an immunity to Poison attack. On top of that, it has 10 resistances, which is not only the most, but double that of Poison, which has the 2nd most at 5. The Steel typing is so good that when paired up with the type that has 5 weaknesses, it will only have 2 weakness and cause a damage reduction to half of all the types. Final score 9. So that's going to be the conclusion of this calculating ranking video. So what do you guys think? Do you agree with this ranking? Do you think the point awarded for immunity is too much? Or do you think the list is absolute butt juice? I mean, it can't be that bad when comparing a Pokemon of the 2 lowest ranked type with the 2 highest ranked type. You can see a clear difference, at least defensively that is. Well, that's my ranking of the Pokemon types. That's about it.